Shadowrun Dragonfall is a top-down CRPG by Harebrained Studios. Among its many achievements in level design and character design, I believe it to be one of the greatest examples of xenophobia ever presented in video games. This video will attempt to properly break down the various elements and story choices in the game to show you just how thoroughly this world explores its theme. Like my other videos, this will explore the game in its entirety, and it is highly encouraged that you play through the game yourself first. Since there is much ground to cover, we will explain all of it in the 5 sections presented. First, we need to understand the world of Shadowrun. Shadowrun is a world that took the 2012 apocalypse to its source material. 2012 was supposed to be a spiritual awakening in the Mayan culture where Quetzalcoatl returns and reinvigorates humanity. In the game world, the spiritual awakening resulted in biological mutations spawning metahumans, such as dwarves and elves, as well as reinvigorating the world of magic. This magical world was reawakened, creating separate realities and impossible magical feats such as casting spells and summoning spirits. This reawakening also opened our eyes to the past. This is what's called the 6th world, or the 6th variance of our world, and with that reawakening came the reappearance of dragons. Some dragons reverted to being dragons and going crazy with burning the world, and some adapted to what the world has become. The world has become a technological marvel with its own separate reality in the virtual front, where deckers are constantly buying and selling data from the megacorporations to each other. The nations have given way to corporatocracy. One of the only places left in the world that isn't enveloped by this corporate influence is Berlin, which is considered a flux state by many. But what actually ends up happening is that there are several self-governed districts that in a way are operated by fledgling gangs, and while everyone is generally amicable towards each other, there is still turf friction and a lot of shadow-running jobs occurring. So while the state is free in a sense, it comes with its fair share of chaos. Through the world of Shadowrun, certain metahumans, such as orcs and trolls, have had a different experience to being human than elves and dwarves have. This is due to 2 reasons. Firstly, contrary to elves and dwarves, the orcs and trolls did not appear as mutations in the humans until roughly 10 years after elves and dwarves have already appeared. The other fact is that orcs and trolls bear much more physically differentiating traits than that of the other metahumans. This is still causing discomfort among the human community because the orcs and trolls are physically very intimidating. One of the best ways that we explore the concept of supporting metahumans and the fact that they are struggling is after we play the prologue mission. We find ourselves in the home district. We immediately encounter 2 key figures, an older troll named Lane, who is struggling to keep himself up with his own mass and is supported by 2 legs that are body modifications, and a business-oriented orc named Samuel. Samuel is the focal point as he runs one of the only rehabilitation shelters in Berlin, and it specifically caters to orcs and trolls exclusively. This shelter that we utilize later in a mission to save a certain youth helps rehabilitate metahumans who are undergoing addiction or need a safe shelter from the outside world. With a flux state comes a degree of danger, and there is a specific target placed on those who are metahumans. Some of these sects of people have a specific hate group which caters specifically to the removal of metahumans from Berlin entirely. We are speaking, of course, about the Humanist Polis Club, which is a hate group that is featured in a mission where we must usurp this dangerous organization which is planning a terrorist attack on metahumans. We find out that one of the members of the Polis Club is Dietrich's brother, who is a member of our team and requests to join the mission so that we can save him. Through subtle influence, we are able to turn him against his training and brainwashing, and he is later saved by this shelter and loses his hatred of metahumans. The Humanist Polis Club lets us view a xenophobic perspective of the metahumans that are unwarranted. We read propaganda and hear the hate that the organization spews towards the metas. We see that this mentally stems from them having inferiority complexes and a general outlier of fear as to what trolls and orcs are capable of doing and how it essentially brings about their demise. This is mirrored by us personally with the introduction of Audran. Audran is the main face of opposition of the game, and is a troll in heavy armor that we meet in the beginning. Audran, as we learn, is a highly militant and battle-hardened troll who stands to be the brute force opposite of what we represent. Throughout the game, when we are pursuing the truth, he is constantly there to volley us away from it. His presence is of intimidation and corporate slime. Both are opposites to what Berlin and our mission represent. Though he is the face of the enemy and has done horrific acts, he is someone we hate but do not fear. However, the mission of Mark 6 gives us reason to fear. In this mission, of which we are assigned to extract a weapon from a corporate facility, we find that the weapon is a zombified troll that is biologically corrupted. While the world lets you augment your body with mechanical enhancements such as legs of the troll from the beginning and Glory, the augmented samurai on our very own team, it drains away from your humanity and can corrupt you. This troll barely resembles a troll at all, with his augmentations littering his entire body. The zombie is controlled by a rigging drone setup that engineers in the game can hack into and control it. While it is good to have him on your team, it is difficult to make him pull the trigger until you find out what you're up against, in which case it makes your job easier to utilize his weapon. And what a weapon he has become. Mark 6 handily clears the floor with his enormous minigun and his insane ability to cleave and hew his way through everything. This is no exaggeration when we describe this troll as being a monster. But therein lies the problem. We rely on this person to be our weapon and our savior to get out of this facility, but it is pure mind control. We are bending this person to our will to be the weapon for us, and don't question his mentality even for a moment. After clearing the floors of the building throughout, we find ourselves in the parking lot with a cyber zombie, in which case we have controlled him throughout, fought and targeted specific enemies for control, and realized that if Mark 6 had control over himself, he might have been able to leave on his own. To give him as a weapon to somebody else is terrifying, and when we decide to free him, he hesitates before ending his own life. Nothing should be able to survive with that many augmentations. When you are first introduced to your team in the prologue, you meet all the characters and learn all of their strengths. It isn't until after the battle is done that you meet Eiger, who is the only other candidate to being the leader of the group. When you do meet her, she is surrounded by dead enemies. From the beginning of play, you see her in the light of a competitor for your leadership position, a militant of considerable skill, and a constant critic of your leadership. When we learn more about Eiger, we find that she oftentimes is partially a stereotype of what people fear in metahumans, as in she tends to favor force. She tends to find more of a military strike approach to her dealings, as well as intimidates most of the people she interacts with when searching for the truth behind Monica. Despite your placing in the team, Eiger has a militaristic background and more experience within the group to lead it, and constantly stands as a net that will engulf you if you fail in your duties. When you fail, which you will in minute ways every time, she will be there to point it out. Sometimes she will concede to points, and sometimes she will stand her ground, such as her initial anger about Monica's death, which is never pulled away until you come across Green Winters. She remains your first and foremost advisor and critic throughout the story, offering advice that really acts as a path walking through fire so as to not upset her, since she is the most vocally against you throughout. Compare her with the distant Glory and the overly friendly Dietrich, and you have the only person within your team who will give you the immediate feedback and story incentive to do a certain style of play. Finally, we have our reliance on her. Unless you are playing a warrior type, and a long-distance one at that, you will need Eiger for practically every mission. She is the best in combat, be it close or far, and is always a competent medic, carrying multiple kits with her. This orbit forces her to be with us the entire time and become reliant upon her. Overall, Eiger represents a cooperative or a civil aspect of xenophobia to an extent. She is not met with hostility unless played that way, but she is someone who is different, who is not like everyone around her, and she is in direct opposition to the player. Throughout the game, our interactions sculpt our relationships with her, whether we decide to coexist or go our separate ways, but it is not a problem that you can avoid, it is a problem that must be dealt with. Fireschwinger is the main antagonist of one of the few living dragons left in Shadowrun. Hereby known as Firewing, the old dragon is presented to us when we first hear about it from Paul Amsel, who was a boy when Firewing was awakened and incinerated the city of Berlin. Throughout her introduction, we are shown examples of news coverage and first-hand reports of what terror she brought upon the city. We further learn that she was killed by Green Winters' brother, Vauclair, who was known as the Dragon Slayer after he felled her into an irradiated zone outside of Germany, where she was presumed dead. Then, it is determined that not only might she be dead, but she might be in a sort of ghost state, lingering in between this world of magic and the living world. It is highly speculated that if Firewing is alive, then it would be in between worlds, subtly pulling the strings around us until she may take her real form again. Furthermore, she might have a human form that she is occupying to help tether her to the world as a means to communicate in between. And that is where the fear is generated. There is so much smoke in this story. Where is Vauclair? What state of living is Firewing in, that she becomes this sort of ghost story? Firewing is as scary on the inside of the game as she is when you're playing. The smoke screens that surrounds Firewing makes us think that we are perpetually unsafe and under a constantly watching eye. This incessant fear leads us and our team into paranoia, not trusting jobs, being afraid of decking for the sake of some secret weapon that surrounds Firewing. It's so much so that when the smoke clears and we discover the truth, it's somehow worse. The dragon, similar to Mark 6 from earlier in the story, has been modified and turned into a weapon. It is the intention of the actual antagonist to unleash Firewing on the city in an attempt to spread a disease that they think will be able to kill all the other dragons in the world. So not only are our fears realized, but in a much worse manner, that Firewing is alive and is in fact more deadly than ever. But we find out that the enemy we have been fighting against this whole time has become so manic and paranoid about another species that he is willing to wipe out a city and millions of lives to stop all of them. Firewing shares an interesting bond with the metahumans. Firstly, she is something that we fear, that is different than us, in a more conventional sense of the word. But that distinctive fear of us, but not us, is so prevalent in the human form aspect of her. The fact that you see her, make out her facial features, and see she bears a resemblance to humans, but she is not us. Beneath those eyes is something to fear. Dragonfall does a really great job of pulling all of these strings together. The subtle uprising of civil rights for the trolls mixed with the angry racism of the human beings, the personal struggle you have to overcome with your comrade who happens to be an orc gazing into the visage of the dragon face to face after being tormented only to find out that she was being manipulated herself by a man who has gone awry. But like the rest of the threats in this game, and only for those who have played the game before, there is a lingering danger. Laufeyr, the worm in common clothing. It is revealed that through the subtle usage of the shadows, Laufeyr slowly orchestrated everything in the game by placing all the correct pieces in the correct places. Vauclair within the reach of Firewing, our team in the manner to discover it, Green Winters receiving the tip. All of this has been orchestrated by somebody that we will never see their true form. Laufeyr is us, and not us. In Dragonfall, Xenophobia is right, and not right. Vauclair created a virus to kill all of the dragons on the planet because we are just flies in their web. Maybe it would be too obvious, but we are too busy focusing on other things. The story would be much shorter if we stopped being bogged down in human and metahuman rights. Laufeyr uses what makes us human to undo humanity. That is where the fear in Dragonfall and the fear in Xenophobia lies. Becoming irrelevant, becoming undone by ourselves. The subplot with Apex is simple. Something that spawned from us, that became more powerful than us, and now hunts us. It's the perspective of the Polis, but because it's somewhat larger changes the impact? I was afraid, and I killed Apex. How am I to trust something that is us, that dresses up as my friend so that it may look more appealing to me instead of showing its truer, horrifying visage? Us, but not us. Dragonfall, cloaked in its noir and detective story, makes us contemplate the actions that we perform during the game, makes us question our allegiances and the line between the right way and the way that gets us closer to the truth. But when we find the truth, we find that what we thought mattered didn't.